I have two stories from when I used to work at the Queen Mary. I had always heard about it being haunted, but I was always a skeptic about anything paranormal. I'd usually work the third shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Our job usually consisted of tearing down for parties that were held at night and setting up for breakfast catering in the morning. So there was a lot of downtime in between those events. For the most part, we'd hang out in our warehouse/storage room. The warehouse was located next to one of the old pools that were drained. One night, me and my coworkers were just chilling there waiting for a party to end when we started hearing the sounds of kids laughing. It was one of those eerie, echoey laughs that just sent chills down all of our spines. But then we also started hearing splashing sounds. A look of terror fell across all of our faces. Eventually, we all got the courage to look outside, and when we got to the pool, you could see wet footprints that led from the pool to the door of our warehouse. We all just noped the fuck out of there. This second incident wasn't as scary. On another night, we had to clean up after a party around 2 a.m. While cleaning up, one of my coworkers told me to look up and check out this hot girl. Up on the upper deck of the boat, you could see this beautiful woman in a red cocktail dress looking down at us. Being the teenager that I was, my coworker and I decided to try and get a closer look. We climbed up the stairs to the upper deck in order to get a better look, but in the time it took to climb up the stairs, she had disappeared. I never really believed in ghosts, but after working there for about a month, I truly became a believer in the paranormal. I worked as a front desk agent at a Marriott for years. During the winter season, we would have high schools book out the entire hotel for a big ski trip to a nearby resort. It would be complete chaos. All 140 rooms would have 4 high school seniors each from about 7 different schools. Needless to say, the entire hotel would be a weekend-long party. Everything you could imagine would happen on these weekends. From explosive diarrhea in the hallways to people riding patio furniture down the water slide. Some kids punched holes in the wall connecting their rooms for their own personal doorway, and others cut open their mattresses to hide drugs and booze. There was even one kid who had his thumb cut off by a slamming room door. During these events, we would have local police stationed at the hotel entrances in an attempt to control the ridiculousness. The instance that stands out in my mind, however, is the night a young man OD'd in the first-floor hallway. He was unconscious on the floor, and when paramedics arrived, he had no pulse and needed to be defibrillated back to life. He was taken to the hospital for a few hours, but somehow was allowed to leave. He came back that same night to his friends, all in the lobby, and shouted, "Who's ready for shots?" The guy fucking died and came back a few hours later to party. Unbelievable. I used to work the overnight shift at a hotel with rooms ranging from very cheap to moderately expensive. The hotel was located just off the highway and was designed to be a convenient accommodation point for people traveling through the city who didn't want to make their way into the busier parts of the city. Because of that, it wasn't out of the ordinary when a guy who looked as though he hadn't slept in a while came in and booked a room for the night. He didn't want breakfast delivered or a map of the city. He didn't seem to have any spare clothes. He did want to make sure that the rooms were made up every day, even though he was only staying the night. In hindsight, all of those things were somewhat significant as indicators of what he was thinking at the time and what happened next. The night was quiet. I didn't scout the hotel through the night, and I made no effort to contact the guests unless they called me for some reason. Nothing felt off. The next morning, when the head housekeeper arrived, we prepared for her to start making up rooms while the guests leaving that day checked out. We had a 10 a.m. checkout time, but we were happy to be flexible with the time if we were given some notice. The guy from the night before didn't give any notice, hadn't checked out at 10 a.m., and had specifically asked about the housekeeping services. Because of that, the head housekeeper and I decided to knock on his door to check on him. No answer. I used my master key to let us into the room and announced that we were at the door. No response. We walked in to see the man in bed. He was curled up with the blankets up to his ears, just lying there. I knew immediately what had happened. The head housekeeper didn't catch on immediately. She walked up to him, put her hand on his shoulder, and shook him, trying to wake him. After only a moment, it clicked in her head what was going on, and she squealed and ran back towards me. The man had died during the night. He had advanced cancer and had no family who would find him if he had died at home. We don't know why he wasn't in the hospital, but given that he still had hair, he must have refused treatment, or treatment was not an option for him. He wanted to make sure that when he died, someone would find him, and so he chose to die in bed at a cheap highway hotel. It was creepy, but it was also really sad. No one should be that alone in life. I used to work in a small 20-room hotel built from an old mansion. So yeah, super creepy from the right perspective. I've heard old ghost stories, but never saw anything supernatural. Rather, the creepy stuff came from guests. One time, a lovely couple checked in. Although the guy was way older than the woman, they were friendly and enthusiastic. Later that night, about midnight, keep in mind that at that time, I was the hotel's only employee on staff. My switchboard told me that their room had dialed 911. Since the guy was old, I was afraid he had a heart attack or something. I go to their room and knock on the door. Takes a while, but the door opens a bit. It is pitch black in their room. Like, they closed the curtains and turned on no lights. I can't see the guy at all, but I hear his voice, and it's a cackled whisper out of a horror movie. Yes. Excuse me, sir. Is everything okay? I saw that you dialed 911. Who are you? I'm the guy who checked you in. You dialed 911. Is everything okay? We don't have a phone. They giggle creepily. Yes, you do, and you called 911 from it. Is everything okay? Oh, we meant to call 411. I'm sorry. He closes the door. I go back to my desk, fearing something insane is going on. The next day, the two of them come downstairs, super happy, acting completely normal again. Shit was just weird. Now, I'm pretty sure I have an explanation for the guy's behavior, which is drugs. But damn if that wasn't creepy. So, back in the mid-80s, I was stationed in Hawaii. I needed some extra cash, so I picked up a gig working security at a hotel. This particular hotel had a smaller hotel next to it that was owned by one of the major airlines. We basically provided check-in and check-out services for them, but I never really did much for them in terms of security other than chase off the occasional drunk guy trying to follow the flight attendants into the hotel. One night, I got a call asking me to come up to one of the higher floors of the hotel to try and quiet things down. These floors were typically where the pilots stayed and had bigger rooms and usually were the ones without much issue. The elevators opened to 2 buck-naked pilots chasing 5 naked flight attendants around the hall. The entire group was trashed, and there were signs that there was probably some coke in one of the rooms. On seeing me, one of the pilots told me to get out of my clothes because they needed more cock if they were going to tame these wild women. I politely declined and told them that they were going to have to keep it down because we were getting complaints. The pilot saluted, herded the women into his room, and closed the door. Not sure what happened, but there weren't any more noise complaints. The weird part was, for the next 3 months I had the job, I would routinely see the pilots and the flight attendants in question. All acted as if nothing happened, and I never had another complaint. I've worked as a front desk employee for over a year now. Story time. On a slower night, I was working the front desk by myself. We didn't have any housekeeping or housemen working that night, so I was completely alone aside from the guests in the hotel. I'm a 5 feet 5 inches, 120 pounds girl. By the way, this will matter in a minute. A big, burly dude walks in, and I can tell immediately that he has some form of mental handicap. I ask him if there's anything I can help him with, and he says he needs to call the cops. Now, I'm like, oh shit, oh fuck, okay, play it cool. I ask him if it's an emergency, and he says he just needs the cops here because he's run away from home. So far, he hadn't seemed threatening, so I do call the police, but I call the non-emergency number. They usually respond pretty quickly. He puts his hand out like he would like to speak to the operator, so I hand him the phone. I couldn't hear the operator, but I assumed she asked him what the problem was. He proceeds to answer with, I ran away from home and I'm suicidal, and very homicidal. I'm, of course, like WTF, but I'm trying to keep the situation calm. I give the operator the address, and the dude waits in the lobby, staring at me, until I secretly call our security company to send someone out, who then escorts him off the property. The cops showed up about 30 minutes later and never bothered to find the guy. 10 out of 10 thought I was going to have to fight off a handicapped dude, and I was pretty upset the cops didn't take it more seriously and try to find him. Not so much as creepy, but this event was just odd. I came into work one morning expecting to hear that nothing eventful had happened the night before because we only had something like 10 rooms rented. It was the middle of our dead season. I spoke to the front desk agent to get my morning notes on the day, and she told me that a guest on the second floor had called a few times about hearing a radio coming from somewhere. The front desk agent sent the houseman to investigate it, but he couldn't find anything. The guest called again while I was standing at the front desk, so I headed up there to investigate. The guest let me in the room, and I immediately heard the radio. It wasn't loud, but it was just loud enough to be annoying. I checked everywhere in the room and didn't find the source of the noise. I checked my in-house list, and there were no guests in any of the rooms beside, above or below them, but we checked the vacant rooms just to be sure someone hadn't left something on during a previous stay. We didn't hear anything. We searched for the source of the noise for 30 minutes, and I had to go tell the people in the room that I couldn't find it. They were really nice about it. They just wanted to find the source of it as well because at this point it was driving everyone insane that we couldn't find the source. They checked out later that day, and I went back to the room and still heard the noise. We never did find it, and we never had a complaint about it again. The whole thing was just weird. At a hotel where my girlfriend worked, her manager received a call reporting water flooding into the halls. She went to check it out, but no one answered, so she entered the room. There was a naked guy standing there, bleeding all over the place. The bathrooms were to the left, and there was a little corridor past them that led to the rooms. He just sat on the ground, not saying anything, between the bathroom and the bedroom area. The whole room was dark, so the manager stepped over the guy and went over to the first bed. There was someone in the bed, and she asked what happened, but there was no response. She went to roll them over and realized they had been pretty much decapitated, their neck cut to the bone. She looked to the other bed and saw another lady in that bed, her neck cut to the bone as well. Now she was standing in the room, and the guy with blood all over him was still sitting between her and the door. She ran out but noticed before she left that there were a bunch of pictures all over the wall with flowers and stuff stuck in the headboard, kind of like a shrine or something. Anyway, it turns out they had a satanic suicide pact, and the guy drugged and killed the two women, then tried to kill himself and failed. He left the bathtub and sink running so someone would find them. I've had several weird and scary moments happen while working in a hotel in DC. From suicides in luxury suites to terrorist claims, working in the hospitality industry will definitely have you talking about something. One of the scariest things I've witnessed firsthand is having the fireplace in our lobby explode almost right in front of my face. It all started in the morning when the lobby began to smell a little bit like gas. Usually, it's never a problem because the restaurant is next to the front lobby. But after several complaints, we decided to look for the source. Turns out the fireplace was causing the smell. It was a gas-starting fireplace. One of the new guys tried to adjust the temperature on it, and instead, the fireplace reacted unexpectedly and started a 3-foot flame. One of the bartenders tried to blow it out with the fire extinguisher, but it turns out it was not the correct one to use, and it caused the fireplace to explode and create an even bigger flame. All I remember is falling to the ground because of the explosion, and the sprinklers went off. The entire front lobby and restaurant were flooded. I thought I was going to be able to leave work, but they still made me stay my whole shift. Lesson learned from this incident. Not all fire extinguishers are used for the same purpose. There are like 4 different kinds to stop a specific fire. Now, the creepiest request I ever got was to find an escort for a gentleman and give a room to a porn star. DC hotels for you. We once had a double-leg amputee guest who was also an alcoholic. He got around in a motorized wheelchair, and his caretaker/nurse came with him for this trip. One night, he was down in the lobby, drunk, and his caretaker had clearly had enough of him for the day. He was cruising around the lobby in his wheelchair, taking turns way too fast. It was raining that night, so the tile floors were a little slick, and yes, the signs were up. Anytime he would zoom by his caretaker, She would half-heartedly tell him to stop, but he didn't care. The front desk staff kept asking him to slow down, but he would just flip them off, mumble something, and go faster. This particular hotel had a very steep ramp in the front next to the stairs. The ramp was not for wheelchairs, it was only to help people bring luggage in and out, and the sign next to the ramp clearly stated that. In his drunk and agitated stupor, he didn't read the sign and went flying down the ramp. He toppled out of the wheelchair and tumbled down the ramp, ass over tea kettle like an egg. As soon as he hit the ground, he started yelling about suing the hotel and how he was going to take all their money. The poor security guard working had to pick the guy up to put him back in his wheelchair while he was still screaming. Then the security guard just slinked away as fast as possible. I still laugh any time I think about that one. Another time we got a call at the front desk from a guest saying the person in the next room was screaming. A couple of people went up to check it out, and somehow a morbidly obese man, at least 400 pounds, had gotten himself stuck when he was in the shower. I don't know what he was going for, but he got himself wedged in between the shower and toilet, kind of half sticking out of the shower. He was completely stuck and saying that his knee was going to give out any second. The fire department had to come and cut him out. But it was that same poor security guard that was tasked with holding up a fat, dripping wet, naked man until the fire department got there. If anyone at that hotel deserved a raise, it was that security guard. He's seen some stuff. I've worked in hotels for almost 13 years and have an interesting story. My coworker is a bellman at a hotel, and one night he was assisting a young couple of guests with their luggage, or so we thought. He assisted the guests with 2 full carts of mostly random, odd-looking stuff and a few pieces of luggage. The gentleman seemed to be normal, but his girlfriend was on drugs, not the pharmaceutical kind either. So, my coworker spent over 40 minutes unloading their stuff from the car, then to their room. Now he had a bunch of boxes with random things, long black cases that looked like rifle cases and bullet cases and weird-looking machines that couldn't be identified. After chatting with him, a lot of his stories didn't add up at all and sounded very shady. After my coworker finished assisting him, he did not give my coworker any gratuity for assisting with all of his stuff. After being annoyed for all the services he did for our guests, and feeling uneasy about him being really shady as well, my coworker ended up just looking up his name online. We found out the guest had a warrant for arrest in another state. His warrant was for drug possession/dealing, indecent exposure, and gun possessions. Also, on the warrant said he is armed and dangerous. So my coworker went to management/security, and they decided to call our local police department. They looked up his info, and the police department came in with a full arsenal and arrested him. He had a massive amount of drugs with intent to distribute and weapon possessions. The guest was arrested and taken back to the state and put in jail. The moral of the story is, always tip your bellman, especially if you're doing shady/illegal activities in the hotel. I worked at a hotel that was owned by a college. The rooms inside the courtyard were rented out to customers, but the outer rooms were meant for long-term stays and college kids. There was an old man that lived in the very front of the hotel, had for decades. He was a germaphobe and was terrified of spiders. He would come down at night and talk to me. For some reason, I was super interested in everything he had to say. Mostly because it was boring and slow at night, but he knew a lot of history about the city we live in. One night, he came down to the lobby and was in tears. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me that there was a spider in his room. Could I get rid of it for him? Normally, the only people allowed in his room were the housekeepers when they changed his sheets, so I had no idea what I was in store for. I opened the door to see that every inch of his room was covered in old newspapers. He had plastered them on the walls, the tables, the sinks, chairs, everywhere. There were stacks and stacks of newspapers everywhere. I found the spider in the bathroom and killed it. Just as I was about to flush, he was like, no. I asked him, what is wrong? He didn't want me to flush it because it might crawl back in. So I took this mushed spider in a tissue and out of the room. He was a sweet old man, but it just really creeped me out seeing his room covered in newspapers. Was working as a bartender at a hotel bar this summer. One night while I was playing Flappy Bird when there was no one at the bar, I saw 3 people coming downstairs. I hid my phone and looked at them. One of them had a dildo duct taped on his forehead, dressed as a rooster. The other guy was wearing a KKK cloak with a whip in his hand, singing the Uptown Funk song, and the third guy was dressed as a maid, a guy with a female maid costume. They just passed around the bar, making a circle around the bar twice. It's a round bar. Then coming behind the bar, the rooster asked if I could make a blowjob for them. While I was taking out the shot glasses, they stopped me and said, "No, I mean a real blowjob," to which I was confused and told them I'm not into guys. They laughed and said, "We know, but we want to make train sex and we need a fourth." I was confused for the first few seconds. Then my imagination kicked in. Not knowing how to react, I told them that my shift was ending in 15 minutes and they could ask the next bartender if he wanted to. A few seconds later and some awkward eye contact, they went outside near the pool to wait for the bartender. I went to the bathroom just to avoid them, and when I came back, they were gone. I worked in a very old riverside hotel in England when I was younger. The place was 17th century, but there'd been a building of sorts on that spot for far, far longer. We'd always understood it was haunted. There were reports of voices and things being moved regularly. People would complain that their rooms were cold even with heating on. I myself had been tapped on the shoulder more than once by nothing. We all felt there was at least one female spirit there. It had been a brothel in the 1800s, so it made sense. My job was to make up the beds and clean the rooms. I was quite young at the time, about 18, and so I used to sometimes get unwanted attention from perverted older men. One time, this man in his 40s, I guess, kept saying things to me. I was so uncomfortable, but he was booked in for a week and I felt too shy to say anything to the manager. On his third day, he'd gone out very early and I'd made up his room, put clean towels in, etc. And as I was leaving, I said something like, "Bloody old perv, I hope you get sick." And that night, long after I'd gone home, he came down to reception at about 11 p.m. and complained to the night manager that there was a stink in his room and it was making him feel very unwell. The manager went up to his room and it just reeked of vomit. He looked under the bed and in the cupboards to see if the man had thrown up but hidden it or something, but he could not trace it. He moved the man to another, not so nice room and went back downstairs. Half an hour later, the man was back down. The vomit smell was back. The manager ended up just spraying air freshener about as there were no other rooms. The man left in the morning and got a refund. When they told me what had happened, I felt that our female prostitute ghost had heard what I'd said about him getting sick and had literally brought him sick in the form of that smell. Subscribe if you enjoy the video or watch another.